There are men who ask for permission, and there are men who simply know what's theirs. Frank Delano was the second kind. He'd watched it happen 11 times in 3 months. The same black SUV, the same tire tracks cutting through the soft earth of his private road, the road he'd graded, graveled, and gated with his own hands after 30 years of laying pipe for other people's cities. The same woman behind the wheel, chin up, eyes forward, like trespassing was just another Tuesday. He'd tried everything a decent man tries, but what Karen didn't know was that Frank had stopped being decent about it. Before we dive in, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you love HOA revenge stories, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss what comes next. Frank Delano was 61 years old, divorced, and done with noise. 30 years as a pipeline engineer had taken him across 7 states, 3 time zones, and 1 marriage that couldn't survive the distance. When he finally retired, he didn't want a condo, a complex, or a neighborhood where someone else decided what color his shutters could be. He wanted land. So he found it, 12 acres on the rural edge of Pinecrest Commons, a small HOA community where the lots were large and the neighbors were supposed to be few. The private road was the whole point, a quarter-mile stretch of packed gravel cutting through his property, connecting his house to the main street. He'd spent 2 summers getting it right. Drainage ditches, crushed stone base, timber posts at the entrance with a simple chain and a private road, no trespassing sign. It wasn't fancy. It was his. He noticed Sandra Pruitt the first week. HOA president for 7 uninterrupted years, Sandra moved through Pinecrest Commons like a woman who had personally built every house in it. Perfectly pressed slacks, dark hair pulled tight, a smile that arrived before her eyes did. She welcomed Frank with a community handbook and a comment about his entrance posts that they might need HOA approval depending on their height. Frank nodded, let it go. 3 weeks later, he came home to find her black Chevy Tahoe parked halfway down his private road, blocking his path to his own garage. No note, no apology, no explanation, just tire tracks in the gravel he'd laid himself.
He told himself it was a mistake. First times usually are. It wasn't a mistake.
The first time, Frank unhooked the chain at his entrance posts and drove around her, told himself it was a misunderstanding, told himself reasonable people make mistakes and reasonable people correct them when asked politely. He knocked on her door that evening. Sandra answered in a pressed blazer like she'd been expecting someone more important. Frank explained, calmly, that his road was private property, deeded, signed, clearly marked. Sandra listened with the patience of someone who had already decided the conversation didn't apply to her. She told him she'd been checking on a drainage issue near the back of the development, and his road had been the most direct route. She said it the way people say it when they mean to do it again. He let it go. He shouldn't have. By the 6th week, it was happening twice, sometimes 3 times a week, always the black Tahoe, sometimes early morning, sometimes dusk. Frank started keeping a log, dates, times, photographs from his front porch. He submitted a formal trespassing complaint to the HOA board. The response arrived 9 days later. A single paragraph noting that Sandra had been acting in her capacity as HOA president to monitor community infrastructure, and that his road, while privately deeded, bordered common HOA land and therefore fell under, Frank read the line 4 times, shared access consideration. 3 of the 5 board members had been appointed personally by Sandra. He contacted the county sheriff's office. A deputy came out, walked the entrance, confirmed the NO trespassing signage was clear and legally sufficient, told Frank that without catching her in the act in real time, a criminal trespass charge was nearly impossible to enforce. He wrote Frank a report number and left. That was when Sandra shifted tactics. 2 weeks after the sheriff's visit, Frank received his first HOA violation notice, $120 for, quote, unpermitted structural installation, the timber entrance posts he'd built 2 summers ago and never once been questioned about. The week after, another notice, this one for his drainage ditch, deemed non-compliant with community grading standards. He'd had a civil engineer design that ditch. Didn't matter. The invoices kept coming. His nearest neighbor, a widowed cattle farmer named Earl who'd lived on the adjacent property for 19 years, had watched all of it from across the fence line. One afternoon, Earl leaned on a post and told Frank, without being asked, that Sandra had done this exact thing to the family who'd owned Frank's land before him. Slow violations, accumulating fines, pressure applied until people either paid, complied, or left. The previous owners had left. Earl said it not to discourage Frank, but to make sure he understood exactly what kind of opponent he was dealing with. Frank listened, nodded, filed it away. Then came the morning that broke something loose in him. He was loading his truck before dawn for a fishing trip, the first real break he'd allowed himself in months, when his headlights swept across his private road and caught the Tahoe sitting there, not passing through, parked. Sandra's black Chevy Tahoe parked squarely across the middle of his road, engine off, no one inside, blocking the only way in or out. He missed his trip, sat on his porch for 2 hours waiting for her to return, watching the sun come up over land that was supposed to be his and his alone. He filed a police report. He called a property rights attorney who told him civil litigation was possible but slow, 2 years minimum, costs up front, no guarantees. He wrote to the county land commissioner. Every door opened into another hallway. And through all of it, Sandra Pruitt attended HOA meetings, waved from her driveway, and pressed her slacks. There is a kind of anger that doesn't explode. It calculates, it measures, it waits for exactly the right conditions. Frank drove to the farm supply store on a Saturday with a short list and a long memory. That was the day he stopped filing reports.
Frank spent 3 weekends on it. Nothing illegal, nothing that would give Sandra or her board a single page of paperwork to use against him. Just land management. The kind of quiet, methodical work that 30 years of pipeline engineering had made instinctive. He installed a cattle grid, a full-width, heavy-gauge steel cattle grid set flush into the gravel at the entrance of his private road, the kind used on working ranches across the county, completely legal on private property, permitted and logged with the county land office. Around it, he packed fresh gravel, smoothed the edges, and made it look like it had always been there. Earl helped him set the frame on a Sunday afternoon, and by Monday morning, the entrance looked almost identical to how it always had. Unless you were driving a low-clearance vehicle, like a Chevy Tahoe with aftermarket running boards that dropped her clearance by 3 critical inches. Frank had measured twice. The HOA's annual outdoor community breakfast happened on a Saturday in late September. Sandra's event, Sandra's production. Folding tables on the common lawn, neighbors in camp chairs, the kind of captive audience that only a mandatory community gathering could produce. Frank arrived early. Earl was already there, coffee in hand, positioned near the fence line with the particular stillness of a man who knows something is about to happen. Sandra arrived at 8:15, moving fast the way she always did, like someone who had never once been stopped by anything. The Tahoe turned off the main road, rolled toward Frank's private road entrance out of pure habit, out of 7 years of unchallenged assumption. The running boards caught the cattle grid with a sound like a gunshot. The Tahoe lurched, stopped hard. Every head at the breakfast tables turned. Sandra climbed out slowly, face cycling through confusion, then fury, then something close to fear, because 30 neighbors were already watching. She pointed at the grid and announced loudly that it was a road hazard, that it violated community access standards, that Frank had installed it without proper authorization. Frank stepped forward with his county permit, his land deed, and his property survey, every document laminated, every date stamped. Then Sandra made the mistake that finished her. Flustered, voice climbing, she turned to the gathered neighbors and declared that she knew for a fact the cattle grid was non-standard because she had personally coordinated all approved road installations in Pinecrest Commons, and Frank had never once come through her for access to his own road. The lawn went quiet. She had just told 30 neighbors that she believed she had authority over a private road she had no legal claim to. Earl set his coffee down very slowly. The community breakfast continued that morning, just not the way Sandra had planned it. 4 neighbors approached Frank before the tables were cleared, not to congratulate him, to file complaints. Each one had a story, a fine that made no sense, a violation notice that arrived right after a disagreement with Sandra, a permit denial that had never been properly explained. They'd carried these things quietly for years, the way people do when the person causing the problem is also the person running the process. Frank's cattle grid had cracked something open. Within 3 weeks, 11 formal complaints had been submitted to the county HOA Oversight Board. Earl produced 19 years of personal records, dates, notices, patterns that he had documented with the patience of a man who always suspected the moment would come. The county investigator described the pattern in her report as a systematic use of HOA authority for personal leverage. Sandra Pruitt resigned from the presidency before the vote could remove her. The margin, when the board counted it anyway, was 9-1. The 1 was Sandra's own proxy vote submitted before she stepped down. She still lives in Pinecrest Commons, still drives the black Tahoe, but it stays on the main road now. Frank re-graveled the entrance that fall, reset the timber posts. The cattle grid stayed, not as a trophy, but because it was good land management and it worked exactly as designed. He and Earl had coffee on the porch the morning the county letter arrived and said almost nothing, the way men do when the right outcome has finally caught up with the right person. Frank had no regrets. He hadn't broken a single rule. He'd simply built something on his own land and let Sandra's entitlement do the rest. Here's what I want to know, and leave it in the comments. If someone kept trespassing on your private property and the law wouldn't help you, how far would you have gone? If you enjoyed watching karma work, smash that like button and subscribe. I post new HOA revenge stories every week. Comment below, have you ever dealt with a Karen like this?